morning class and welcome sa lesson 5 ng ating Obligations and Contracts class. So, today we will be discussing yung iba't ibang uri ng obligations. What are the different kinds of obligations? So we have here quite a lot to discuss, pero we'll try to simplify it and narrow down the discussion. Pero once you have the questions to ask, you can always ask sa ating Google Forms. Okay? So, for today, we will be discussing the different kinds of obligations, just like what I said. And let's start with pure obligation. So, what are pure obligations? Kumbaga, these are obligations that are pure. Of course. But what makes an obligation pure? It is pure if it is not subject to any condition. Okay? We will learn later na merong iba't ibang klase ng conditions under conditional obligation, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, pure obligations are contrasted more often with conditional obligations. It is not subject to any condition at it is immediately demandable. Ibig sabihin, there's walang specific date na naka-mention, or there's no specific condition that is attached to the obligation. So, it is immediately demandable. You can demand for it immediately. But again, if you'll remember, hindi naman porke ngayon yung obligation, ngayon mo na din makukuha. Of course not. We have what we call demand. And we have already discussed that last time. So, again, the rule is no demand, no delay. So, an example of a pure obligation, gaya nung nandito sa example natin, is A obliges himself to pay C 1,000 pesos. Again, A obliges himself to pay C 1,000 pesos. Now, is there a condition? Wala. Is there a date na in-specify when the payment will be made? Wala. So that means this kind of obligation is pure. Walang other conditions na naka-attach. So what does it mean? Since it's a pure condition, it is immediately demandable. So you can demand it immediately. Okay? So this is often in contrast with what we call conditional obligations. Now, what is a conditional obligation? According dito, a conditional obligation is one whose consequences are subject in one way or another to the fulfillment of a condition. Kumbaga kung kanina yung pure obligation ay wala siyang kakabit na kondisyon in fulfilling the obligation, dito meron. Kumbaga, bago i-fulfill yung obligation, meron munang conditions before doing it. What is a condition in the legal sense? Ano ba yung tinatawag natin na condition? Well, a condition is a future or uncertain a future and uncertain event. It is something na mangyayari pa lang in the future at hindi tayo sure kung kailan siya darating or kung darating man siya o hindi. Okay? So, which is weird kasi kung titignan natin ang characteristics ng conditional obligation, according to dito sa lecture natin, the characteristics of a condition is it is future and uncertain. Ibig sabihin, it happens in the future at hindi tayo sure kung mangyayari siya or when will it happen, if it ever will. Pero meron ding isang characteristic ng condition which is past but unknown. Kumbaga, pwede mong gawing condition yung isang past event na hindi nyo na both of you don't know about. Kumbaga, pwede mong gawing condition ng isang bagay na nangyari na pala pero both of you don't know it. Maybe we will be discussing this in the future. Okay. there are two types of conditional obligations. There are two kinds of conditional obligations. Yung what we call suspensive condition and uh, resolutory condition. Sorry, there are two types of conditions rather. The suspensive condition and resolutory condition. Now, what is a suspensive condition? What is a resolutory condition? So, a suspensive condition is when the fulfillment of condition will give rise to an obligation. I repeat, uh, it is when the fulfillment of the condition will give rise to an obligation. Kumbaga, once the condition happened, kung nangyari na yung kondisyon na tinutukoy natin dito, magkakaroon na ng obligation yung debtor. Okay. Whereas, kung yung resolutory condition, it is the condition where the fulfillment of the condition will extinguish the obligation. Kumbaga, the condition, the obligation is running sa ngayon, pero once na dumating yung resolutory condition na yon, the obligation will stop, will cease. So, yun yung ibig sabihin natin when we say resolutory condition. Okay, to distinguish whether a condition is suspensive or resolutory, we need to determine what is the effect of that condition. Kung nangyari ba yung condition ay magkakaroon ng obligation si debtor, or kapag nangyari yung condition ay matitigil yung obligation ni debtor. So dun sa suspensive, magkakaroon ng obligation kapag nangyari yung condition, whereas in resolutory condition na stop yung obligation ni debtor once na nag-arise yung condition. To clarify this, let's have an example. Yung example natin dito is, I will give you the car if you pass your midterm exam. Okay. I will give you the car if you will pass your midterm examination. First, is this a conditional obligation? Well, yeah. Kung titignan mo kasi doon, meron kang if. Okay? If you will pass your midterm examination. Kumbaga, may condition pa before they will give you the car. Okay. This is a suspensive condition because the happening of the condition will give rise to the obligation. In simple terms, ganito yan. Kung mangyayari yung condition, in this case, ang condition natin ay kung napasa yung midterm exam, magkakaroon ng obligation si debtor to give the car. Okay? So, what happens if hindi nangyari yung condition? Well, walang obligation si debtor, kasi nga in suspensive condition, gaya nga ng sabi natin kanina, kapag kapag nangyari yung condition, saka lang magkakaroon ng obligation. Okay? This is different when we think of resolutory condition. Dito sa example natin, I will lend you this car until you have your own car. Ipapahiram ko sa iyo yung sakyan ko hanggat hanggang sa makakuha ka na ng sarili mong sasakyan. Okay. Again, papahiram ko 'tong sasakyan ko sa iyo hanggang makakuha ka na ng sarili mong sasakyan. Now, what's the condition there? Well, the condition there is hanggang sa makakuha ka ng bago mong sasakyan. But what will happen if you get your own car? Ang sabi dun sa example natin kanina, pag nakakuha ka na ng sarili mong sasakyan, ibabalik mo na, kumbaga, yung sasakyan dun sa debtor. So, here, yung obligation niya na ipahiram yung sasakyan is running na by the time na by the time na promise niya na ibibigay niya, na ipapahiram niya yung sasakyan, pero matatapos yung obligasyon na yon kapag nag-arise na yung kapag nag-arise na yung condition, which is kapag nagkaroon na siya ng sariling sasakyan. So again, what will happen if nagkaroon na ng sariling sasakyan si creditor? The obligation of the debtor ceases to exist. Hindi na niya obligasyon na ipahiram yung sasakyan niya because of that condition. Okay? So that is the distinction between suspensive and resolutory condition. Okay. So, what are the rules when it comes to conditional obligations? Okay. First, impossible conditions contrary to law shall annul obligation. Okay? Kung yung conditions mo daw ay impossible, it will annul the obligation. For example, ibibigay ko sa iyo itong sasakyan ko kapag pumuti na yung uwak. Okay, in that case, is the condition impossible? Well, if we stick to the idea that the crows are black and they never are white, well, that's an impossible condition. At dahil impossible yung condition, it will not happen anyway, might as well annul the obligation. Kumbaga, annulment means it will stop, or it will eliminate yung obligation. So if there is an impossible condition, it will annul the obligation. Or for example, babayaran kita kapag naubos ang tubig sa dagat. Another impossible condition, right? Well, yeah, another impossible condition, so the obligation is annulled. Okay. Next, the condition not to do an impossible thing is considered not agreed upon. So kung yung condition ay ang hindi paggawa ng impossible thing, well, it's as if walang condition at all. It reverts to being a pure obligation. Okay. Next, the condition that an event happen in a determinate time extinguishes the condition once that time happens. Once that time arrives. Okay? For example, kung sa December 25 ay may jowa ka na, bibigyan kita ng cellphone. Okay. Kung sa December 25 ay may jowa ka na, bibigyan kita ng cellphone. Okay. Now, dumating si December 25. Natapos si December 25. Wala kang jowa by that time. So what will happen to my obligation to give you a cell phone? Mawawala na siya. May extinguish na siya. Okay? So there. Or kapag nanganak si Juana, for example, ng January 1, on or before January 1, bibigyan kita ng bagong sasakyan. Okay. Problem. Si Juana ay na-declare na baog noong December 25. Question, what will happen to the obligation? Well, hindi na mangyayari ever yung condition. So that in itself extinguishes yung obligation. In fact, it becomes an impossible condition already. Okay? So wala na, extinguish na yung obligation. Ma-annul yung obligation. Alright? So another example, another rule when it comes to conditional obligations. The condition that that an event happen in an indeterminate time, obligation is only effective at arrival of upon arrival of that condition. Okay. Ibig sabihin lang yan, kung wala namang nakaset na date kung kailan dapat mangyari yung isang kondisyon, kapag magkakaroon lang ng obligation kapag dumating yung date na yon. Okay? Kapag dumating yung date na yon. For example, bibigyan kita ng or babayaran kita ng 1 million kapag nagka-jowa ka. Okay. Now, I did not give a time kung kailan mangyayari yun. Basta kapag nagka-jowa ka lang, whenever that may be. Ano? Kapag nagka-jowa ka, bibigyan kita ng 1 million. Or kapag kapag gumraduate ka, bibigyan kita ng 1 million. Okay. That's indeterminate. Hindi natin, wala akong sinet na time. Magkaibang bagay na yan pag sinabi ko na pag gumraduate ka by 2022 or whatever. Ano? Pero in this case, kapag gumraduate ka lang or kapag nagka-jowa ka lang, nagiging effective lang ang obligation upon arrival of that condition. For example, nagka-jowa ka ng December 2045. Okay? 2045. So, that's the only time that my obligation will arise. Kung mabibigyan lang kita ng 1 million by 2045, siguro by then, ang value na lang ng 1 million ay parang 100,000 na lang. Okay? So, that's what it means. Ano? Now, what if wala akong tinakdang time at it never happened? For example, hindi ka nagka-jowa your whole life. Am I obligated to give you something? Am I obligated to give you that 1 million? No. Because sabi dito, if indeterminate yung time, walang sinet kung kailan dapat mangyari yung condition, well, the obligation only arises by the time na nag-arise yung condition. Okay? Now, the condition is fulfilled if debtor prevents fulfillment. Okay. Magkakaroon daw ng ma-fulfill daw yung condition, and ibig sabihin nun mag-a-arise na rin yung obligation or ma-extinguish na yung obligation kung yung debtor prevents the fulfillment. For example, yung example natin kanina na bibigyan kita ng 1 million kung magkakajowa ka. Okay. Pero yung nangako na magbibigay ng 1 million, pinipigilan ka naman na magkaroon ng jowa. For example, sinisiraan ka sa kung sino mang lalaking lumapit sa'yo, or more brutal, pero pinapatay niya lang lahat ng lalaking lumalapit sa'yo. Well, in that sense, kapag pinipigilan ni debtor na mangyari yung condition para wala siyang obligation, ibig sabihin that the effect of that is na-fulfill yung condition. Therefore, nagkakaroon din siya ng obligation. Another example na hindi naman masyadong brutal. Okay. I will give you this car if kaya mong paghiwalayin, kung mapaghihiwalay mo yung asukal, creamer at kape sa 3-in-1. Okay. Now, you are doing it, pero si debtor, hinihipan niya yung 3-in-1 para hindi mo mapaghiwalay. What will happen there? Well, it depends kung how will you interpret that, Pero kung yung in the case na dahil piniprevent ni debtor yung pag-fulfill mo ng condition, na-fulfill yung condition, therefore kailangan niya ibigay yung reward, Another interpretation there is that is an example of an impossible condition. it means it will annul the obligation. In the first place, hindi seryoso yung tao na to enter into that obligation to begin with. So the obligation is annulled. However way you look at that, it's up to you. Ano? Next, the effect of conditional obligation once fulfilled in the case of obligation to give is uh, it will retroact to the day of the constitution of the obligation. Kumbaga the palanan, once the condition arises or once the condition happens, in an obligation to give, it shall retroact from the day of the constitution of the obligation. Kumbaga, yung obligation mo to give ay nag-start na way back. It looks back during at the time na pre-promise or ginawa mo yung that you constituted yung obligation na yan. So I think that's pure and conditional obligations.